Chapter 1. The Key to Room 3. Come in, traveller, out of the cold, mind the step, there's frost on it tonight, and let the door shut behind you. Your key is on the board. Room 3. Top of the stairs, the door at the end of the passage. The fire's going. The chair is yours. And I'll begin at once because tonight's story starts up the valley from here, in a little town above the snow line, in the deep of a winter long ago. His name was Jonah Pye, and he mended books for a living. You'll not find his name inside any of the books he saved, which is the way of his trade. The better the mending, the harder it is to see. A binder's finest work looks like nothing at all, like a book that was simply never broken. And so the world is full of his kind, invisible, walking about with strong, quiet hands and paste under their fingernails, and nobody thanks them, and they do not seem to mind. Jonah learned the trade from his father, at a bench by a window, and when his father died he inherited the bench, the window, the customers, and a bone folder, which is a binder's most personal tool, a flat blade of polished bone for creasing and smoothing, worn by 40 years of his father's hand into a shape that fits Jonah's own hand exactly, which is either a coincidence or the whole story of fathers and stumbin, depending on how late at night you think about it. He was 30 or so the winter this story happened. He came up the valley in December to do 2 weeks of work for a bookseller, and the sky had other ideas, and the 2 weeks became something better. And when the roads finally let him go, he came down out of the hills to this coast and slept one night in room 3, your room, and before he left in the morning he mended one last thing. You touched it yourself tonight, traveller, down in the hall, though you didn't know it. But that's the end of the story, and ends must wait their turn. We begin on the valley road, on the carrier's cart, under a sky the colour of held breath. Chapter 2. The Road Up the Valley. The carrier came through the market town at noon. The same family, I'll have you know, that brings this house its flour and its post to this day. They have been hauling this story's characters about for 3 rooms now, and have never once been late, and Jonah rode up beside him with his carpet bag between his boots and his tool chest lashed among the sacks behind. The valley road climbed all afternoon. It went up alongside a stony river that talked to itself, through woods standing bare and patient, past farms pulled in tight for winter, stock in the byres, hay in the lofts, smoke rising thin and straight from every chimney like a signature. The air grew colder in a clean, dry, promising way. Puddles in the cart ruts were lidded with white ice that creaked under wheel like a ship's timbers. And over it all hung that sky. You know the sky I mean, traveller, not grey exactly. Paler than grey and lower than it ought to be, and perfectly still. A sky with no weather in it at all, because it is saving up. The carrier looked at it twice in the first hour and 4 times in the second, and finally delivered his professional opinion, which was one word. Snow, he said. And then, some miles later, being a man who never used 2 words where one would do but would occasionally, on long hills, spend a second one, plenty. The town, when they reached it in the last of the light, was called Belcombe, and it sat high in a fold of the fells with its back to the north wind, a couple of 100 roofs, a square church tower, one steep street of shops with lamplit windows, and above the town nothing but the darkening hills going up into that waiting sky. Frost ready glittered on the cobbles. People went by with their collars up and their breath going ahead of them, and every single one of them also looked up at the sky and nodded slightly, the way you nod at someone you've been expecting. The bookshop stood halfway up the steep street, and Jonah saw the window before he saw anything else, because on a dark December street, a bookshop window is the best lit thing there is. One big square pane, tall as a door and wide as a bed, glowing amber from deep inside, with books standing in it face out like a choir, and past them, in the warm interior distance, the red eye of a stove. Over the door, a painted sign, older than anyone living, Pomeroy, books, bouge, and shed. And in the doorway, holding up a lamp and squinting into the cold, the last of the Pomeroys himself. "Mr. Pye," said the bookseller with enormous satisfaction, as if Jonah were a first edition he'd tracked down after years. "You're ahead of the weather. Just come in, come in. Mind the step. All the best always say that, traveller. I have it on good authority." Chapter 3. The bookshop. Now I must build you the shop, because you're going to be snowed into it shortly, and you'll want to know your way around in the dark. It was 3 rooms deep, and each room was older, warmer, and dimmer than the one before it, so that walking to the back of Pomeroy's was a little like walking back down the years. The front room had the great square window, the newer books, the counter with its brass till, and the stove, a fat black iron stove with a mica window in its door through which the fire showed like a small contented sunset. The middle room was poetry, sermons, atlases, and a rolling ladder on a brass rail that Mr. Pomeroy rode with the absent-minded grace of 60 years' practice, stepping on and pushing off in one motion, gliding past his own stock like a slow gondolier. The back room was the old books, leather and vellum, locked cases, a desk drowned in papers, and it was here that the shop's particular smell was brewed and aged before drifting forward to the street door. Every bookshop has the smell, but every bookshop's is its own. Pomeroy's was old paper and older leather, wheat flour paste, beeswax, pipe smoke laid down in coats over decades like varnish, a ghost of coffee, and under everything a fine sweet dust which is not dirt at all. Traveller, whatever anyone tells you, dust in a bookshop is simply time, settled, minding its manners. The staff consisted of Mr. Pomeroy and a very large grey cat. The cat was called Vellum, and he ran the establishment. He slept by day in a shallow wooden tray on the counter marked Recenter Revels, arranged in a perfect stout circle, and customers had learned to pay their money into the small space he did not occupy. He opened one eye for Jonah, performed a slow assessment of his character, found nothing disqualifying, and went back to sleep. In a bookshop, that is a letter of reference. The work Jonah had come for was laid out in the middle room. First, on the big table, a crate of the town's reading society books, 5 dozen volumes read half to death by the whole of Belcombe, spines cracked, hinges hanging, pages loose as autumn, to be made sound again before the deep winter reading began in earnest. Honest, ordinary mending, 2 weeks of it, and second, alone on its own shelf, wrapped in green baize like a patient awaiting the surgeon. The Atlas. My grandfather bought it the year he opened the shop, said Mr. Pomeroy, not touching it, in the voice some men use in church. Every Pomeroy since has said he'd have it rebound, and every Pomeroy since has lost his nerve. It's yours, Mr. Pye, when the small work's done and your hands know the shop. He paused. It's the maps, you see. A man can forgive himself for tearing a sermon. Jonah opened his tool chest on the end of the great table and laid the tools out in their old order. His father's order, the bone folder, the knives, the awls, the linen thread, the beeswax, the little harp-shaped sewing frame, the brushes for the paste. The stove ticked, the lamps hummed, vellum recurled a quarter turn, like a man settling deeper into an opinion. Outside the big square window, in the yellow lamplight over the street, without any fuss whatsoever, the first flake of snow came down. Chapter 4. The snow begins. It began the way the serious snows always begin, casually. One flake, sauntering, then a few more, wide apart, in no hurry, like the first arrivals at a party who pretend they've only come to see if it's the sort of thing worth attending. Jonah and Mr. Pomeroy stood at the window a while and watched them come down through the lamplight, and the street watch too, the ironmonger in his doorway across the way, the baker's boy with his basket, 2 dogs, everyone in Belcombe pausing to look up with that odd hush people get, that mixture of nuisance and blessing. The sky finally saying the thing it had been holding all day. "Well," said Mr. Pomeroy, with the deep contentment of a man whose shop was warm, whose cellar was full, and whose entire livelihood consisted of the indoors. "That's that then." They shut the shop together. It was a good ritual, and Jonah liked it at once. The bolt on the street door, thrown with a sound like a full stop, the till counted into a tin box, 2 lamps out, 1 lamp carried, the stove banked down to a slow red murmur that would hold till morning, and last of all, Mr. Pomeroy's rounds, a walk through all 3 rooms, unhurried, the lamp swinging soft light across the spines, less an inspection than a good night. 60 years traveller, and he had never once skipped it. Some men lock a shop, some men tuck it in. They ate upstairs, in the low, warm parlour over the shop, at a small table by another square window with the snow ticking softly against the glass. Mutton stew that had been getting acquainted with itself on the range since morning, and bread, and strong tea, and afterward 2 baked apples that had been sitting in the range's falling heat all evening on purpose, going wrinkled and golden and sweet clean through. Mr. Pomeroy talked about books the way other old men talk about horses or wars. Editions won and lost, a rival dealer outfoxed in the year 18-something, the folio that got away, and Jonah listened with his chair tipped back and the day's miles going warm and heavy in his legs. The guest room was up under the roof, a slope-ceilinged, book-lined little harbour of a room with a brass bed, a washstand, a candle, and 1 small square window right down at floor level, deep in the eaves, through which a person lying in bed could watch the snow come down through the light of the last street lamp. Jonah lay and watched it for a long while. It had stopped being casual. It came steadily now, thick and fine and absolutely vertical in the windless dark, flake following flake down through the lamplight in their thousands, patient as breathing, each one landing in perfect silence on all the ones before. The street sounds had gone soft already. Her last pair of boots came up the hill, sounding like they were walking on flour, and behind the snow's quiet he could just hear the church clock, also going soft, handing the hours over the roofs like something wrapped in wool. He thought 2 weeks of good plain work, a warm bench, a fair employer, and a cat of settled character. He was asleep before he could improve on that, and the snow came down all night on Belcombe, seriously, generously, 6 hours without a single flake missing its turn. And in the morning, traveller, the world had been rebound. Chapter 5. Snowed, and Jonah knew before he opened his eyes. Everyone always knows. It's the light that tells you. That white, shadowless, upside-down light that comes into a room off deep snow, brighter from below than above, lying along the ceiling like reflected water. And it's the quiet, not silence exactly. Something better, the world with a thumb on its strings. He looked out of the little floor-level window and laughed out loud once, the way you do. Belcombe had gone under. The street below was a smooth white riverbed, curbs and steps and cobbles all one unbroken sweep, and every roof carried a foot of snow squared off neat at the eaves like the icing on a good cake. The lamp-posts wore tall white caps, the ironmonger's hanging sign had become a shelf. Nothing moved except the smoke, every chimney in town already going, dead straight in the windless morning air, and 1 dog out on urgent business, plunging along in leaps with a look of scandalized joy. Down in the shop, Mr. Pomeroy had the stove roaring and the kettle on, and was regarding the inside of his own front door with the expression of a general receiving excellent news. The door, you see, opened inward. All snow country doors do, traveller, and now you know why. And when they got it open they faced a wall of snow cut clean as cheese, waist-high, with the morning shining blue-white through its top edge. They dug the step and a path by turns with a coal shovel and a board, and all up and down the street the town was doing the same, doors opening one by one, shovels ringing, neighbors calling to each other the ritual sentences, some snow, worse since the year so-and-so, no, the year before that, which in Belcombe counted as wild celebration. The carrier's boy came floundering up mid-morning with the official word. The valley road was shut, drifted to the hedge-tops at the turns, and would stay shut past any promising. 3 days at the least, a week likelier. Mr. Pomeroy received this bulletin, composed his face into a decent imitation of concern, and failed entirely. "Mr. Pomeroy, Pye," he said, "I am afraid you are stuck in a bookshop, with a full coal cellar, a fuller larder, and 60 loose volumes wanting your attention. I can only apologize." And he went off to the back room humming. An old man handed exactly the winter he had ordered. They moved the great work table that afternoon, the two of them shuffling it forward through the middle doorway, so that it stood square before the big shop window, in the full wash of the light off the street. Snow light, traveller, the mender's light, white even, shadowless, kind to old eyes and true to every colour, light that has already been everywhere and forgiven everything. Under it, every cracked hinge and worn corner in the Reading Society's crate showed itself honestly, and honest showing his half of mending. Jonah set the sewing frame at the left, the paste pot at the right, his father's bone folder in the middle where his hand fell, and Vellum, who had observed the rearrangement from the counter with narrow supervisory eyes, descended, crossed the floor, ascended the table, tested the light, tested the warmth of the stove upon his left flank, and lay down on the far corner in the shape of a settled negotiation. And that, traveller, was the establishment of the mending table, at which the next 5 days of this story, and I hope the next several hours of your night, will be quietly spent. The snow had them, the stove had them better. Nobody was going anywhere, and there was nothing to do but good work, and no hurry to do it in. There are worse fates. I'm not sure on a winter night that there are better ones. Mending table. Let me mend one book for you, start to finish, the way Jonah did it, because he did it 60 times that week, and the rhythm of it is the whole heart of this story, and if it carries you off somewhere in the middle, that is the correct response. He'd take a volume from the crate, say the Reading Society's Voyages, read to rags by half the town, a book that had been to the whale fisheries and back 40 times without leaving Belcombe. First he'd simply look at it, turning it in the snow light, the way a doctor looks at a patient walking in, where it was tender, where it had been favouring one hinge, what it was too polite to mention. Then the taking apart, old spine lifted away in one careful strip. The sections, a book, traveller, is not single pages but little folded families of them, sewn, eased free one by one, each laid down in order, and the old thread, brittle as winter grass, drawn out. A book taken down to sections looks like nothing, like a lost cause, like autumn. This is the moment amateurs despair. Binders put the kettle on, then the sewing, which is the part I'd have you drift to. The little frame stood on the table like a small harp, strung top to bottom with taut cords, and against those cords Jonah laid the first section and began, needle in at the foot, out and around the cord, in again, along and out, and at the row's end, the thread drawn home, snug, not tight, snug, with a sound too small to have a name. Then the next section on top, and the same journey back the other way. In and out and around, and draw it home. In and out and around, and draw it home. 16 sections to a book, and at the head and foot of each, a little linking loop called the kettle stitch. That's truly its name, I promise. The trade is full of kitchen words, kettles and guards and headbands, tying each section to its neighbour below, so that page by page, so quietly you could not say when it happened, a loose heap of paper became one thing again, with one spine flexing all together in his hands like something waking up well. Then the pasting, wheat flour paste, brushed thin, smelling faintly of baking, the one smell that could rouse Vellum's nose from sleep, though never the rest of him, and new mull on the spine, and new hinges of linen, and the boards reattached, and last of all his father's bone folder, walking down every crease, slow, firm strokes, settling everything, smoothing everything, the final word. Then into the press overnight, screwed down gentle, between clean boards. Books, like people, do their real healing while they sleep. He worked to the shop's small orchestra, stove ticking, kettle sighing. The clock on the stairs, which had a worn tooth somewhere in its works and so ticked with a very slight limp tick, 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 tick. To walk. Jonah decided by the second day that he preferred to a punctual one. Mr. Pomeroy's ladder rolling somewhere among the shelves on its long brass rail, a soft cathedral thunder. Pastebrush, snow quiet, holding the whole town in its palm, in its believe warmth. And every hour or so he'd look up from the frame, needle resting, and there would be the street, white, still, smoking gently from its chimneys, and the light would have moved a little on the snow, and that was the news, all of it, and it was enough. In and out and around and draw it home. Stay right there at the table, traveller, as long as you like. The crater's deep, he's not going anywhere, neither is the snow. As in the snow, you might think a buried town would leave a bookshop in peace. You'd have it backwards. Snow is the great friend of the book trade. Nothing sells a long story like a shut road. They came in ones and twos all that week, stamping and glittering, each arrival announced by the bell over the door and a gust of cold, bright air that made the stove's fire lean. And Mr. Pomeroy received every one of them like the first guest at a party, and Vellum audited them from the recent arrivals tray, and Jonah watched the whole traffic of it over the top of the sewing frame. And this, traveller, is some of what he saw. He saw the doctor come in on the second morning, snow to his knees, wanting, quote, something long, calm, and entirely without medicine in it, to read aloud at a farm bedside up the hill where he'd be sitting out the week with a patient mending slowly. He left with a fat volume of sea voyages and a spare candle from under the counter, and paid, and was given, unasked, a second book. Small poems for himself, for the small hours, no charge. Doctors read, too, said Mr. Pomeroy, in the tone of a man stating shop policy of long standing. He saw the schoolmistress trade fair and square, a jar of her own honey, set on the counter with the firmness of currency, against a book of star maps for the school, because with the sky this clear over the snow, she meant to teach the winter constellations while she had them. Mr. Pomeroy weighed the jar in his hand, pronounced the exchange rate generous, and threw in a pamphlet on comets. And he saw this was the third afternoon, and he never forgot it. A girl of 8 or 9, name of Meg, come in wrapped to the eyes, unwind herself down to a red pigtail and a face full of purpose, and lay out on the counter, in a row, her entire fortune, 5 farthings, a ha'penny with a hole in it, and 1 brown egg. The object of the campaign stood in the window, a book of fairy tales with a green cover, and gold on the spine, which she had been visiting, Mr. Pomeroy said later, since October. The bookseller counted the farthings gravely. He examined the halfpenny and allowed that the whole gave it character. He held the egg up to the lamp like a jeweller. Meg, he said at last, it is a rule of this shop, wrote down somewhere I could find you, that the price of any book in snowed-in weather is whatever a reader has honestly got. And it happens the fairy tales came down in price this very morning. You've overpaid. And he gave her back 2 farthings with the wrapped book, and threw the egg to Jonah, who caught it, and who had it boiled for his tea, and who said afterward that no egg since has come up to it. Snow business, Mr. Pomeroy called all this, closing the till on its odd cargo of coin and honey. The takings of the great snow. His grandfather, he said, used to reckon such weeks the richest of the year, though they never balanced on paper. The whole town warmer by a dozen stories. The shop down some stock and up one egg. Show me the ledger, he said, with a column for that. The bell rang them out one by one into the White Street. The stove leaned and recovered, and at the window table the needle went in and out and around and drew it home. Reading hoard. Now we come to the evenings, and I'll speak more softly because this is the part of the story that is mostly made of quiet. Every night of the snow, at 9 by the limping clock, the shop held its reading hour. It was a custom older than Mr. Pomeroy. His grandfather had started it, some forgotten winter, and no Pomeroy since had seen a reason to stop. The shop shut, the bolt thrown, the day's lamps out but one. 2 chairs drawn up to the stove, whose mica window glowed like a small red hearth-moon. Cocoa made thick in a saucepan and poured into 2 tall cups, and potatoes. This was the grandfather's touch, and I commend it to the nation. 2 potatoes set into the stove's ash shelf at supper time, so that they came out at reading hour in their crackled jackets, hot as geology, to be split and butted folded Mr. Pomeroy read. He read to the shop, was how he put it. To Jonah, certainly, and to Vellum, who took the reading hour on the 3rd chair as a fixture of his contract. But also, you understood within a minute of hearing him, to the books themselves, to all 3 rooms of them back into the dark, 60 years of stock, and every ghost of every volume ever sold, the whole silent congregation of Pomeroys, being read to sleep by the last of the line. He read whatever the day had put in his hand. One night it was the sea voyages, before the doctor carried them uphill, islands, trade winds, the noon sight taken, the slow bell of the watches. One night, the schoolmistress's stars, the winter sky laid out constellation by constellation, while the real ones stood over the snow outside, doing exactly as the book said. One night, because Meg's visit had put him in the mood, fairy tales from the shop's own battered copy, the youngest son, the 3rd door, the fox who gives good advice, stories worn round as river stones by 1,000 years of tellings, in which, Mr. Pomeroy observed, buttering his potato, nothing ever truly surprising happens either, and that is rather the point of them too. His voice was a low, mild, unhurried instrument, gone slightly furred with age, and he read the way the snow fell, steadily, without emphasis, entirely certain of arriving. Jonah, in the 2nd chair with his boots to the stove and the cocoa going cool in his hands at exactly the rate cocoa should, mostly listened, and sometimes only listened to the sound, the words going by like the river under its ice, sense flickering underneath, and between the paragraphs the shop said its own quiet pieces, the stove ticking as it settled, the limping clock tick-tock tick-tock tick, Philum's small engine, a page, 3rd absolute silence of the snow outside, pressing kindly on a hand laid on the world of the whales of the book. Some nights the hour ran long, and neither of them stopped it. Some nights Jonah was asleep in the chair by 1/2 past, and Mr. Pomeroy read on regardless, to the shop, to the cat, to the snow, finishing the chapter as a courtesy to the characters, and then woke him with a hand on the shoulder and a candle, and the 2 of them went up the stairs past the patient clock, and the shop stood dark and full of stories behind them, keeping every one. And afterward there were the attic nights, which deserved their own small chapter inside this one, because they were where the days were pressed by candle past the limping clock, which stood on the landing and got the beat of the stairs slightly wrong, the way it got everything slightly, likably wrong, and into the little room under the roof where the ceiling sloped like a tent and the books lining the walls were the overflow of 60 years, shelved by no system on earth except affection. He read a while every night in the brass bed, the sea voyages propped on his chest, one candle, the snowlight coming up faint through the low square window so that the ceiling glowed like the underside of a cloud. He read about islands, reefs past at dawn, The trade wind found and held for 11 days, water gone green over sand. It is a fine thing, traveller, to read about the far warm places of the earth while snow presses on the roof 3 feet above your face. Each makes the other more itself. No one has ever improved on the arrangement. And when the candle was out, he would lie and listen to the house, the way he had listened to houses since he was a boy. Because a binder's son grows up in the quietest of trades, and learns early that quiet has furniture in it. The stove too froze down, ticking as it cooled, each tick a little farther from the last, like footsteps leaving. The clock keeping its kind lane time. Beams easing under the snow's weight with small woody remarks, an old house shifting its load the way a porter does without setting anything down, vellum on his midnight rounds, a soft compression of the stair carpet, no more, and enclosing everything, the snow silence itself, which is not an absence, whatever they tell you, it is a presence, furred and total, the sound of a million flakes holding still at once, and it lay over the town like the flat of a great gentle hand, and under it every small sound in the house stood out precise and dear, the way stars do in the deepest country dark. Most nights, somewhere in that listening, he slid over the edge of sleep without noticing the border, the best of all the ways to go, and the shop sounds followed him down and turned into his father's workshop, which had the same smells in the same order, paste and leather and beeswax and lamb. His father was there in the usual way of such dreams, back turned at the bench, at work. And in the dream Jonah was small again, and it was his job to wax the thread, drawing each length twice through the beeswax block, the way he'd been taught, and to sweep the floor at closing, corners first. A whole apprenticeship had begun with that broom. Sweep it again, his father would say, mildly, not looking up. Corners first. A man who can't be patient with a floor will never be patient with a book. 2 years of floors before he touched a needle. He had thought it slowness at the time. It was, he understood now, at the bottom of a snowed-in December 40 miles from anywhere with the world's most patient trade in his hands, the entire syllabus. In the dream, his father held a mended book to the lamp, turned it, checked the square of the spine, and set it down in the finished pile with a particular soft knock of board on board. And the knock was the beam over the attic settling, and Jonah surfaced for a moment in the dark and heard the snow's great hush and the clock limping faithfully below, and thought with the last lit corner of his mind still holding, and slept. You may take the second chair tonight, traveller. The potatoes split, the cocoa's poured, the voice is low, and nobody in this chapter will ever ask anything of you again. 9 by the limping clock. Listen. The Atlas on the 5th morning, with the Reading Society's crate mended and stacked on the counter like good loaves. Mr. Pomeroy went into the back room and came out carrying the green baize parcel in both arms, formally the way you carry a sleeping child or a kingdom, and laid it on the mending table in the snowlight, and unwrapped it, and stood back. "Whenever you're ready, Mr. Pye," he said. "We've waited 3 generations. We can wait till after breakfast." The Atlas was a great folio, broad as the table's own end, bound a century and more ago in calf gone the colour of strong tea, scuffed blind at the corners, its spine crazed and lifting like old paint. Inside, and Jonah went through it, first page by page, slowly, which took the morning, because you must know a book before you may take it apart. Inside were the maps, oceans crossed by engraved fleets of tiny ships, each with its thread of wake. Coastlines drawn in that old careful hand, every bay named in letters that leaned like wind-bent grass, mountain ranges rendered as families of little shaded caterpillars, seas with room enough in their empty engraved distances for a curly-maned monster or two, put in, you could tell, not from fear, but from sheer reluctance to leave so much good water unused. And over every map, the soft brown weather of foxing, those faint tea-coloured clouds that old paper gathers, drifting across continents that had themselves, many of them, changed name and shape and allegiance while the atlas went on serenely insisting otherwise. It was a book of the world as the world had once believed itself to be, and it was wrong everywhere, and it was magnificent. 2 things Jonah found in it, and I'll give you both. The first was between the pages of the Pacific, a flower, pressed flat as thought, gone to brown lace, a harebell by its bones, picked on some summer fell above Belcombe generations back, and laid in mid-ocean by somebody, for reasons the atlas had kept perfectly for 80 years and was not going to give up now. Jonah lifted it on the bone folder's blade, and Mr. Pomeroy looked at it a long time and said, quietly, that his grandmother had been a great one for the fells in summer, and neither of them said anything else, and the flower went back into the Pacific exactly where it had wintered all those years. Some things you mend, traveller. Some things you leave be. Knowing the difference is the whole of more trades than bookbinding. The second thing was on the map of this coast. Our coast, traveller. The one asleep in the dark outside your window this minute. Jonah, tracing it idly with a dry finger the way one does, found the old engraver had missed something. A cove, a real one, a deep little tuck in the shoreline some miles down from this very hillside, simply wasn't there. The old map ran the coast straight past it, smooth and confident and wrong. It was always missing, said Mr. Pomeroy comfortably. Grandfather used to say every atlas keeps one gap on purpose to leave work for somebody. And since I am the one telling you this story, I'll tell you what neither of them knew. Somebody came. Years after that snow, a quiet man with ink-stained fingers walked every mile of that shoreline with his instruments, and found the cove where it had always been, and drew it into the world properly at last, and slept, when the drawing was done, one night under this roof. But that is room 1's story, and some of you have heard it and were perhaps asleep before the cove. It keeps. Then Jonah Pye took a long breath, and took up his knife, and began, very slowly, in the white shadowless light, with the snow holding the town, and the stove holding the shop, and the cat holding the far corner of the table, to take the world apart. Deep snow days. The thaw was promised for the 6th day, and did not come. What came instead in the night was more snow, a second fall on the first, softer and finer, like a letter with a postscript, and Belcombe woke, shrugged, and got on with being what it now was, a town gone over wholly to winter. The sledges came out. Every farm and half the shops had one, and the steep street, hopeless for carts, turned out to be a boulevard for runners. Coal came down it on a sledge. The doctor's boy flew both ways on a sledge with the confidence of the immortal, and everything that moved did so to Bell's calm sledge with the confidence of the immortal, and everything that moved did so to Bell's, because a sledge in snow is silent, traveller, and silence on a steep street is dangerous. So every horn sledge wore its string of strickenhardians. Icicles grew along the shop's eaves, a graduated row of them, longest by the downpipe, and were measured daily by the youth of the street with a seriousness science would envy. The schoolmistress had her star nights, a dozen children out on the trodden snow in the blue dark, her arms sweeping the constellations while their breath went up. The church clock was dog clear. Meg was seen twice at the big square window, checking on the other books, the green one being safe at home. And in the shop, the deep days found their rhythm, and the rhythm, Jonah noticed, had quietly stopped being an interruption of his life and become his life, the way a tide comes in. Not wave by noticeable wave, but suddenly the rock you sat down on is an island, and you find you don't mind. Stove lit, path dug, kettle on. The atlas on the table, farther along each day, sections lifted free and sleeping in order under weights. The old spine off entire, like a lifted roof. The new sewing begun on the little harp, heavy folio sections now, the chords doubled, the thread waxed richer, in and out and around, and draw it home. Customers, bell, cold bright air, stove leaning, the light moving on the snow, cocoa, potatoes, the reading hour, the limping clock limping, the bolt thrown like a full stop. There was a Sunday in the middle of the deep days, and it was the stillest thing inside a still week. The shop kept the Sabbath shut, and the whole town went up the white street to church in its dark best over its tall boots, and the bell, dug clear now, rang out across the snowfields with that particular winter clarity, each stroke standing alone in the cold air, done before the next began. Jonah went because you do, and sat at the back in the candle-warm fug of wet wool and beeswax, and let the old words go over him with the sermon riding on top like a boat, and walked back down after with Mr. Pomeroy through a town of neighbours moving slow and shiny-booted and content, everyone nodding to everyone, nobody hurrying because there was nowhere to hurry to and would not be for days, and the whole street understood at last for one white week what Sunday had been driving it all along. The road opens. The thaw came the way thaw does audibly. Belcombe, which had spent 9 days wrapped in the great hush, woke on the 10th to a town full of small water sounds, eaves dripping in ragtime, gutters chuckling, the packed street going grey and honest underfoot, fells emerging streaked and steaming in a sudden lemon-coloured sunlight, and down every lane the whisper of snow letting go of roofs in soft avalanches that made the dogs bark with borrowed heroism. By noon the word was official, carried up the hill by the carrier's boy at a run. The valley road was cut through and passable, and the cart would go down at first light tomorrow. So there was one last evening, and it went as the best last evenings do, exactly like all the others, only more so. The atlas was finished that afternoon, and I wish you could have seen the finishing. New calf on the old boards. The colour matched to strong tea. The spine raised in 5 true bands. The old marbled end papers saved and coaxed back in. Every map settled. Every guard sound. The great block of the world sewn so square and swinging so easy that it opened flat at the Pacific. Flat. Traveller. 100-year folio, lying open as a pond, with the harebell asleep in its ocean where it belonged. Mr. Pomeroy turned pages for an hour and said almost nothing which from him was scripture. At the reading hour he read from it, coasts and soundings, capes and passages, the poetry of names, with the book open across both their knees and the cat against the stove. And that was the only night the potatoes went cold, and neither of them minded. The parting, in the blue-white morning, was brief, because the men were of the kind whose feelings run deep and surface seldom. Wages counted out fair and rounded up over protest. Then a parcel pressed on Jonah at the door. The sea voyages. The shop's other copy, the worn one Jonah had been reading in his attic every night, which Mr. Pomeroy had of course noticed, because booksellers notice nothing else so well. For the road, he said. It's a long way down the valley, and a man wants an island or two about him. Vellum, at the great square window, in the recent revels tray, from which he had supervised the entire rebinding of the world, permitted one farewell pat, counted it, and closed the account. Then the cart, and the bells, and down the shining valley with the runners hissing, and then, lower, the wheels put back on at the halfway farm, down out of the white country by stages, the snow thinning to lace, to patches, to a memory lying only in the shadow of the north walls, down past the loud brown river, taking the fells away a fortnight late, down into the low green coastal weather of this shore, where the winter is rain, and the rain is soft, and the dusk came on, and the road came over the hill, and there belowth hold the amber windows, smoke laid low, the sign creaking on its bracket just as it's creaking now, and one window dark at the end of the passage upstairs, a square window deep in the old wall, belonging to room 3, which had been waiting, the way rooms do, without impatience, for exactly this traveller. Used book. He came in out of the cold just as you did. Mind the step, he was told too, and the fire had him at once, and there was soup, because there is always soup, and after it rice pudding baked slow with a nutmeg skin on it like brown silk, and he ate by this very fire with the parcel of islands on the table at his elbow, 10 days of snowlight in his elbow, 10 days of snowlight in his face, and no hurry left anywhere in him at all. It was when he came to sign his name that he met his last patient. The guest book of this house, traveller, is old. It was old then. It lies on the table by the stairs, and every soul who has ever slept under this roof is in it. Shepherds and sea captains, brides and bishops, the storm-bound and the lost and the merely tired, 100 years and more of names, each one a whole story folded down to 2 words and a date. And it was that winter, coming apart. Spines split, boards hanging by threads, the early pages loose and shuffling. A book read to rags, you see, not by reading, but by arriving. Jonah signed his name in it, gently, the way you'd shake an old man's hand. Then he sat looking at it. Then he said, and they still quote it in this house as they quote what the piano tuner said, a book that holds this many people shouldn't have a broken back. The innkeeper of that day, never mind which of us that was, began to say something about the binder over at the market town and the expense and the spring. But Jonah Pye was already gone for his tool chest. Picture the parlour one last time then, because this is where I mean to leave you. The lamp turned up just enough on the long table, the same scrubbed table, traveller, where a map maker would one day ink a coastline, and where a piano stands near now that was not yet mended then. This table has a story of its own, and no vacancy tonight. The fire kept quiet, frost flowering slow on the square window, and beyond it the first soft coastal rain, the tool chest open, breathing paste and beeswax, and the guest book of this inn taken down, with all its 100 years of arrivals, into sections on the table, sleeping in order, every name safe, while a young man in his stocking feet strung the little harp with linen cord and began, by lamplight, to sew this house's whole history back into one spine. In and out and around and draw it home. Shepherds and sea captains, in and out and around and draw it home. Brides and bishops, the storm-bound, the lost, the merely tired. Section by section, name by name, the kettle stitch at head and foot, linking each year's travellers to the years below them. Snug, not tight, snug. While the innkeeper slept in the chair, and the fire kept its own counsel, and the rain came on softer, and the needle went along the cords with a sound too small to have a name, gathering everyone, traveller, everyone who ever came in out of the weather, and was given a key, into one binding, opening flat, built to hold essential v more. He pressed it till morning under the big kitchen Bible and 2 flat irons. He was gone on the early carrier, home down the coast with his islands in his pocket. And the book lies on the table by the stairs tonight. You signed it yourself when you came in. You may not remember, people are tired when they arrive. But it opened flat and easy under your hand, and lay quiet while you wrote, and now you know who to thank. His name's in there too, of course, a few pages back. A map maker, a piano tuner, a binder. It seems to be the kind of traveller this house collects, the menders. I look down that book some nights, and I think the whole inn is really only its binding. And that is the story of room 3. The fire's down to embers, and the frost has finished the window, and I've talked your candle low. So, I'll turn the lamp down low. There, up you go when you're ready. Top of the stairs, the door at the end of the passage, the key warm from your own hand by now. The bed is deep, the quilt is thick, and the hills will hold the snow off till you're dreaming. Sleep well, traveller. Your room will always be waiting.